When I talked to the Director Myerberg, he just brought this up, that it was like 30 years ago. And that's actually when my mom, when I talk about the super woke folk, you know what I'm saying? 30 years ago, it was Mothers Against Police Brutality, which is now Mothers for Police Accountability. So, you know what I'm saying? My family has had a long tradition and work in this accountability space. And you were just saying that you didn't know that was my mom. So, just bringing it to you. And it's a lot of people out there who just make an assumption that this is something that's new and some everything else. Okay, I feel more comfortable now. I just want to let everybody know I lost my monitor, and I'm like, but yeah, I mean, it's real deal. And I'm gonna get to you in 1 second, Director Myerberg. A lot of stuff here, man. I just gotta put that out there though, because like I said, there's a lot of people here who just new woke, man. You know what I'm saying? And welcome. And if it took the events of this summer to get you out here on social media or whatever you're doing, then that's great. But just know, you know what I'm saying, there's a body of work. There's some people who got a body of work out here, and you might want to do some research on that. All right, Director Andrew Myerberg, OPA, welcome to the Morning Update Show.
Thanks, Mark.
How are you today?
I'm all right.
All right, real quick. Some people they don't exactly know what OPA does and what the job of the director is. So maybe you can tell them here quickly.
Sure. OPA, for those that don't know, OPA is the internal affairs for the Seattle Police Department. We are a civilian sworn hybrid. And what that means is that I'm a civilian. I'm not a cop. I'm a lawyer. I run the office and I make the final decisions that come out of the office. And our staff is a combination of civilian and sworn. Right now we have 2 civilians and 10 sworn, and that's a function of the contract. But we also have civilian supervisors, and one side of the house, our policy and community outreach group is all civilian.
Right. All right. So want to get to a few things here. First thing is, it looks a little whatever on there. Let's see if we can figure that out. First thing is some of these findings. The first finding that I want to talk about is what we call here the pink umbrella. That was the pink umbrella day. That was June 1st. Let me find it here. That was the day up there we call the Western Barricade. A lot of people might remember the pink umbrella. We caught it on tape where, really all hell broke loose up there on Capitol Hill, and the tear gas ended up coming out.
We're right here at the East Precinct. It doesn't get any closer than this right now. That's the barricade. Again, if we see the bike officers here, if we see the bike officers tapped out, then people should be concerned. As long as the bike officers are in front, I think that we're okay. They have a reinforcement behind them. But we've seen here the last 4 days, what we've seen the last 4 days is and there it is, they're getting tapped out. They're getting tapped out right there. We have a definite change in posture. We have a definite change in posture right here at the East Precinct. And what I just told you right there is when a bicycle officer gets tapped out by an officer with a gas mask, they've changed their posture and position here at the East Precinct. What we could expect next is tear gas. Why tear gas and possibly flashbangs? Why we say that is, and now they done brought out the troopers. And I'm gonna tell you something, the troopers ain't got no problem firing. These guys, the troopers ain't got no issue letting loose. We saw the troopers on Saturday. Now this situation is escalating. If you know anybody, tag and share this stream. This is right now live at East Precinct. The officers have changed their posture. This gentleman right here grabbed the barricade, and now you see they're reinforcing the barricade. We have not heard an audible anything from an authority here. The umbrellas are out. We're getting pushed back. Don't spray that shit. Don't spray it. Don't spray it. Okay, the umbrellas are here. You see people put out the umbrellas to block the spray. It's rowdy right here. Hold on. Let me bring it down. Let's just try to de-escalate. Let's try to de-escalate this. Let's just try to bring this down, guys. It's a lot of worse shit than going to jail, like a flashbang, shrapnel, or something. Let's bring this down. Let's bring this shit down. So we see him grabbing the umbrella. There's the spray. It's on now. It's on. East Precinct, they're losing control. State police are trying to open the barricade. They're putting the pepper spray in the air. Share this stream. Share this stream. Tag and share this stream. Share this stream. This, God damn it, they got me, you motherfuckers. I'ma eat this shit though. There it is. There it is.
It's a crush. It's a crush.
I got pepper spray all over me. They're not moving. I got sprayed, but shit, I've been through worse. Barricade is up. Barricade is up. The officers are coming with the spray. And this is exactly what's happened here. Get the fuck out my way. Let's see here. This is what's going on. I only got one eye. These are flashbangs. This is flashbangs that they're employing. Hey, bring this shit down. Bring it down. Bring it down. Bring it down. Bring it down. This is share this stream. God damn it. It's the tear gas. It's the fucking tear gas. Police, stop. Holy shit. Tear gas is everywhere. Holy shit. Oh, shit.
Man, so June 1st, 2020, I mean, even just looking at this video, which is like, man, every time, and actually we had promised our audience that we weren't going to just play this, but I think it's important today that we play, some of this footage here. Director Myerberg, there's a long list of things here that says not sustained, removed, or whatever, but this was sustained here. Maybe you can tell people as to what you found.
Sure. So when we were evaluating this case, the fundamental question for us was the decision to disperse that crowd, like what we just saw in the video, was that consistent with policy? And then all the things that flowed from that, all the blast balls, the CS gas, the OC spray, was that all consistent with policy? So we investigated 3 different supervisors, all of whom were in various levels of command, and ultimately we identified that the supervisor that's referred to in there as, I think it's named employee 1, was the one that was making the call on the ground to disperse, and then to disperse using those tools. So we found that the decision to disperse the crowd violated policy, and so did the use of the blast balls, the CS gas, and the OC spray that followed.
In that tape, I mean, it was so many things that even when we watched it, there was nothing audible, and you hear me on the video. There's been no audible. No one's telling people to move. No one's telling people to disperse. You couldn't hear, anything out there. 2, it's like, especially after seeing Washington, D.C., they said that this was a violent crowd. Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody's going to make their own judgment, man. But, compared to what we've seen in these situations, that I would consider that violent. But these people, thousands of people peacefully protesting there. The other thing is, man, how much did that change in posture? Would you hear me on tape? I'm like, you know what? As long as the bike police are here, everything's going to be cool. Only thing we got to worry about is if they get tapped out by the officers in the gas mask, and that indicates a change in posture. And if the gas mask comes out, we can expect tear gas. How much does the change in posture play in elevating the anxiety there on the front line?
Yeah, I think it played a significant role. And I think after that incident, or certainly in the later days of the protest, SPD didn't do that anymore, because I think they saw that it escalated the crowd. I mean, the reality is that this is a different protest than what we saw in some of the other days. I think, you were there for May 30th and for June 2nd and some of the other days that were more violent. I agree with you. This was not a violent crowd. There were people pushing the barricades, but from what we could tell, there's no active threat that would have warranted that use of CS gas and other less lethal tools. I think there were orders, Omari, earlier that evening to stop pushing the barricades, to stay off the barricades. But again, we saw one projectile thrown. There's not widespread violence in the crowd. And you're right. I mean, there's thousands of people. So even if you're saying the people in the front, even if you could say they posed a threat, what about the hundreds and thousands of other people there in the crowd?
Well, I mean, and I say this all the time because my position is that this is very true, that on June 1st and the other days, the tear gas came out on Capitol Hill. Protesters didn't get tear gas. A neighborhood that had protesters in it got tear gas.
Agreed.
Police tear gas their own office.
Yeah.
Like the East Precinct was just 100 feet behind him.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, I think the issue is, I think what we've seen kind of top to bottom was that the protest, I mean, SPD made a number of mistakes. I don't think anyone is debating that. I mean, this was a big one for us. And I think there were other cases that were focused more that we issued in this last grouping of cases that were more individual officer focused, so blast ball deployments. But as far as a command failure and something we saw is just from top down, a poor decision, this was that case.
Yeah, the thing is as well is when all this comes out about the Seattle protests and the books are written and, everybody's got a documentary these days. It's crazy. But the tear gas coming out on June 1st definitely made a lot new protesters. There was a lot of people who weren't even in the protest before, but once they're sitting at home and they got tear gas, or their kids are breathing in tear gas and all this other kinds of stuff. They're in a coffee shop and everything else. It changed the trajectory of the protests up there on Capitol Hill.
And I agree. I agree with that. I think that's what we've seen too, is that things shifted after that point. The other thing that was told to us in the interviews that we conducted was that there was some intelligence from the FBI that there was going to be damage, or that people were going to come after and try to burn the precinct. We tried to figure out where that came from. We couldn't find out necessarily. There was no documentation that we found, but again, those are the types of things that we were told in the interviews that we conducted.
Yeah, we keep hearing that there was a credible threat. I mean, clearly, when the FBI has a real credible threat, you see they gear up and all this other kinds of stuff. No one has still ever been able to tell us the credible threat that occurred that the FBI said they had. And I don't know if this is something that your office investigating as well, is who gave the order to leave the East Precinct, because no one can actually tell us that this person, this name, this badge number, or this elected official gave the order to leave the East Precinct.
Yeah, we are investigating that case, and we're almost finished with our interviews. We're speaking to folks in the mayor's office, but we've interviewed SPD folks and we've interviewed Chief Best. So I think we're pretty close to issuing findings, and I think we know how the decision was made and who made the decision.
I'm gonna hold you to this now.
Yeah,
you're gonna have to come back.
Okay.
For when you release the findings of the East Precinct, man, I could talk about this one incident the whole show, but there's a few other things, and there's some stuff from Twitter that we want to get to as well. A real big thing right now is actually while we're on these issues right here and these findings, I got a video that's gone viral here from speculation, kind of highlighting a few other things here in these findings. And it also leads to the question of what is the actual written reprimand? What does that mean? But let me play this. This is about 60 seconds.
I want to remind you that if you are a person who experiences what you believe is an inappropriate use of force, please do report it. It will be investigated appropriately. Any use of force was outside of compliance, an officer will be held accountable.
Jesus. Christ.
Anytime we use force, it's investigated, it's looked at, it's reviewed. We have the most accountability of any place in the country, and I mean that sincerely.
Oh.
We're moving.
Okay. You're good. Go this way.
So no one is going to use force and it go unchecked and unnoticed.
Hey, bring this shit down! Bring it down! Bring it down! Bring it down! Bring it down! Share this stream! God damn it!
So right there is saying that no officer has been disciplined beyond a written reprimand for anything 2020. A few things there. There's long threads on Twitter and lots of analysis on everything else. Man, why hasn't anybody been disciplined? What is a written reprimand actually mean?
So there's a couple questions there. I'll answer your first one first. So multiple officers have discipline pending for the cases, particularly the officers that use force, including suspensions. When OPA recommends a finding, and then when we sit down with the chain of command and we recommend discipline, that then goes to the chief of police. The officer then has the right under the contract and due process and the law to go before the chief and argue for himself or herself as to why the discipline should be overturned or lower. So it's a process. Once that is done, and none of those cases have finished that process, once that's done, the chief will make a final call and that will become public. The case in which was on the video where there's the officer riding into the back of the two individuals walking the street, that was from months and months and months ago. That's not from the protests that occurred. So I think it's correct that discipline hasn't been imposed yet, but it's incorrect to say that it won't be. It will be. And frankly, I think, from what I've seen on Twitter, and I try to stay away from Twitter, but, people I think want termination and nothing less. If that's what they want, people are not going to be satisfied.
Now, and just to be clear, all you can do is you can make a recommendation, but anything really comes down to the chief. It's up to the chief, whether the chief accepts your recommendation, whether the chief warrants out a punishment, whether the chief fires. All you can do is recommend, and all you can do is put somebody up against the standard of what the policy is. So you can just say if they're in policy or out of policy.
Yep. So that's my job. And I can't even say that they violated criminal law. I could say in or out of policy.
I'll be honest with you. It just really sounds like, it does the biggest, I guess you would say, complaint or feedback about OPA. It just kind of seems like, your hands are tied, or it's almost like your job is just to be like, and maybe it is, did this officer meet up to the policy or not meet the policy? Yeah. So even if it's a bad policy, if the officer didn't break the policy, they've done nothing wrong.
So yeah, I think that's correct. That is my job, right? Like my job is to call balls and strikes, is to apply the policy. It's not to go and create the policy that I want to see. Sometimes I do that, right? Is I can recommend. So as a result of the cases we saw with the overhand deployments, right? My recommendation to the department is prohibit overhand deployments. So we'll see if the department does that. I don't know whether they will do it. I can't compel them to do it, right? But if the policy says a certain thing, I can only hold officers to what that policy says. I don't get to create the policy as I want to see it.
All right, and we're going to get to this mask here, but you're talking about policy. I talked to Inspector General Lisa Judge here, and really on two issues. One was about SPOG, and what she talked about was that some of the powers of OIG and some powers of OPA are restricted because of collective bargaining in the SPOG contract. But Lisa Judge here talks a little bit about how OPA and OIG and how you're supposed to go after specific officers, and her job is the overarching policies of it. Man, we want to get, and that's why I talked to the IG, we want to get all the right people in the room, because ultimately, if the policies are the issue, right? And your job is to be like, does somebody meet up to the policy, but you can't necessarily change the policy. And the OIG's job is to go with systemic changes. Then it's like, anyway, let me play this. We'll circle back around.
A lot of times people will see a decision that's come out of OPA and they're not happy about it, but really OPA is making a decision about whether an officer violated policy or not. So, if there's a decision that's made by OPA that people are unhappy about, it's probably more a problem of that the policies need to be fixed or implemented or something. And so it's, Director Myerberg's analysis is also limited by the system. So he's the one that tries to weed out bad apples, if we're going to use an analogy. My job is to look at things like the barrel and how long the apple's been in there and who put the apple in there and things like that, the systemic parts of it. So if he finds, let's say, in the macing of the pepper spray of the child incident this summer, that the officer did not violate policy, that's the limited environment he's working under. My job now, and with Sentinel Event Review, this is one of the things we're going to look at, is what's the broader issue? Because even if it's not a violation of policy, that's an outcome that we don't want.
Is this a good breakdown of this?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit more, I mean, yes, it's a good breakdown. It's a little bit more complex. So SPD has policies that govern a whole bunch of different things, right? How an officer interacts with you, how they're supposed to write tickets a certain way, how they do X, how they do Y, right? But some of the policies come from law, right? So the Supreme Court, Graham v. Connor, sets out a standard for when is force consistent with law, is it reasonable, necessary, and proportional. No policy change that I make is going to change that, right? That is a Supreme Court case law standard that applies to all uses of force. We talked a little bit off the record, Amari, about legislation, right? What legislation is pending? One bill that's pending is to look into the reasonableness standard, right? So when I look at force, I say, would a reasonable officer, with that officer's training and experience, is that a reasonable decision? That's what I'm required to do. I don't have an option. That's my job, right? I don't get to substitute my opinion for that officer's or Twitter's opinion from that officer's. That's not my job. So I'm calling balls and strikes, and I'm trying to, where I can, identify issues and policies and make those changes. And I do that a lot. I mean, I think there's this misnomer that I don't. I mean, I think I make between 30 and 40 policy recommendations a year, right? And I think 80% of those are implemented. So am I not moving fast enough? Maybe not for some people that are watching this show, right? Am I changing every single possible that I can? No, because I can only advise on policies. I can't compel them. But we have changed policies. We're trying to move the system forward. It just may not be in the way that everyone wants me to do that job.
All right, we're gonna come back to policies here in a minute. There's a few things. One big thing that we saw here, and if nothing else, in 2020, I guess the SPD and the OPA have stepped up their social media game. But there's this original tweet right here from Casual Weekend Mom, and it was about seven tweets. I'm an ER nurse in Seattle. Last night, Seattle Police Department officer came to the ER to obtain a statement from the assault patient. One officer, Eric Whitehead, blatantly refused to put on a mask while standing in a high traffic hallway. There were COVID positive patients in a new room nearby. It goes on and on. 55,000, probably even more at this point, 55,000 retweets, 115,000 likes. So then SPD pops in. First, thank you and your colleagues for your work during the pandemic. All of our officers have previously been directed to use face masks, PPE to protect themselves and others. Please contact OPA about this incident so they can start a review. And then here's OPA. Last night, OPA initiated an investigation into an allegation by an ER nurse that an SPD officer refused to wear a mask in the hospital. So maybe you can tell us about this. Also, we got a statement here from this ER nurse.
Yeah, so we were notified whenever the night this happened, we were notified of it. There's about an hour and 20-minute body-worn video that's recorded by the officer. So I watched the body-worn video. We're going to evaluate whether or not, well, first of all, I mean, it's clear the officer's not wearing a mask. So, but the issue is, is the way he approached the nurse and interacts with the nurse and her supervisors unprofessional. So that's what we're looking into. We've already started to interview nursing staff. I'm sure that some won't want to talk to us just because they don't want to be in the public eye. And I'm sure but I'm sure we'll be able to lock down some of the statements, then interview the officer, and then that's the investigation. So this should be a fairly quick one.
All right, and let me see here. I have her statement. It's kind of long here. Overall, I'm not with the political agenda or make it about winning or losing or blindly taking down cops. As a voter and a taxpayer, I pay for the police. They're public employees with the job to protect and serve, and it's totally unacceptable for an officer to act in exactly the opposite of that by violating rules put in place to maintain health and safety in a hospital. There needs to be consequences for these actions beyond the police department making a statement that they're looking into it and then failing to act. And now SPD, we got a lot of stuff in here, man. It's just.
I mean, let me just say while you're looking for
Sure.
them, I agree. I mean, there's nothing I disagree with in that statement. The officer should have been wearing a mask.
Right. SPD, this was just article. SPD reaffirms the mask guidelines. And also, you guys, and maybe you could explain this here real quick, is that people can go and file a complaint with OPA, or OPA can initiate an investigation. Now, I read in the OPA tweet, it was like you initiated an investigation.
So I think, I want to say that the nurse, I'm not totally positive, but I want to say that the nurse may have filed something online. if you file something online with our office over the weekends, our admins don't work over the weekends. So I independently reviewed the video and added other allegations and concerns that I saw from the video. So the complainants will probably be the nurse and then OPA. So I think it's a combination of the two. There are times that we will watch video or we'll watch something and we'll self-initiate, but generally, even when we self-initiate, we've gotten other complaints too. So there's an amalgam of community members and OPA that are the complainants.
All right, you can look there at that monitor. Seattle Police Accountability Office investigating actions of officers in DC during Capitol building attack. What's going on?
He's just turning it over to me. So we, an SPD officer saw a picture on social media of two other officers and a third who was a retired officer that were at the Capitol building, or not, we don't know at the Capitol building, but at the protest that occurred in DC on the date in question. So we got a referral from the department. They want us to look into it. We're looking into it. I mean, the question for us is, did these officers cross the barricade? Did they go into the Capitol building? If so, the chief's been pretty clear that they'll be terminated. But I want to make clear, because I looked at your Twitter feed too. I think people are saying to us, well, terminate them for being at the protest. That's not constitutional. They have a First Amendment right to be at the protest. If they violate the law, it's a different question. So I just want to be super clear with people to not have unrealistic expectations. There's no legal basis for an officer to be fired simply because they went to a protest.
Yeah, and we've said that here on Converge as well, that if the officers went there, President Trump spoke at the lips, addressed the crowd and everything else, there's people, that's their constitutional rights to be able to sit there and gather. I think the issue is now, did they violate the border or the barrier there at the Capitol? Did they enter the Capitol?
And just to be clear, if that happened, so we would look at, so if we find any evidence that suggests that, we're going to send it outside to the FBI to investigate. We wouldn't investigate the criminal acts, but the FBI would look at it and then we would get it back and we would do our administrative investigation when that's done.
All right, so maybe you can explain this though, because we always hear that it's hard for the chief of police to fire people. It's hard for people to leave and everything else. Maybe this right here was a Seattle Times. Seattle police chief fires officer for racist remark after fellow officers report on him. If you can kind of take us through this timeline here, and then also, what role did the union play or not play? And is this officer actually fired, or will, are they gonna?
So we got a complaint. So four officers went to a hospital, and in the hospital they dealt with a man who was in crisis, who appeared to be of African descent, and they eventually trespassed him from the hospital. The next day they were talking amongst themselves, and one of the officers, the one who was terminated, said to the other officers, "You remember that guy we interacted with, Kunta Kinte?" The officers confronted him, was like, that's a racist statement. He doubled down and walked away and just said, "No, it's not." The three officers then reported in a memo to their supervisor, reported that a racist comment was made, and the supervisor sent that to OPA, and we did our investigation. So we brought the officer in, we interviewed the officer. He didn't deny making the statement. He said he didn't understand the significance of the term, but we found that he violated policy, bias policing and professionalism. So the chain of command agreed, and there was a termination recommendation that went to the chief, and the chief terminated the officer. And as far as the union did not appeal the termination.
Yeah, so the union was like, yeah, you're on your own.
Yeah, just to be clear, I think this is obviously not a fact that people want to know, but I think, the union has, appealed only 2 or 3 cases the entire year, including, and has not appealed a number of terminations that have occurred this year. So in that respect, I think that credit is where credit is deserved, and I think they did not appeal this case, and they could have.
I don't think they wanted that smoke, man.
No.
Like, let's be real.
But it's still the right decision.
Yeah, of course it's the right decision. They ain't what. How they gonna defend that? 2 things here. I know you said that you don't legislate by Twitter, which is a good thing.
Can I go back and answer while you're looking one question that you asked about the written reprimand? And we get this question a lot about discipline levels. So generally, the way discipline works is all disciplines governed by precedent, right? So when discipline is issued to an officer, what you do is you look at the officer's past history, and then you look at other similar cases. If you don't do that, the reality is that an arbitrator will later overturn the discipline. This is all theory of law called just cause. discipline and findings have to be supported by the law. And if, for example, for that riding into the back of the person with the bike, right? If we had recommended a 30-day suspension for that individual, it would have been overturned by an arbitrator. So what happens is the way discipline works is you give discipline and then it's called progressive discipline. So if an officer revisits the same conduct, the discipline goes up, up, up. Very rarely, and you ask this, like, what does a written reprimand do? The answer is, I don't know, right? But my other answer is that what we've seen is that very rarely do officers repeat the same misconduct over and over and over again. And where they do, they generally get terminated. So I guess what I would argue is that what a written reprimand does is it puts an officer on notice that you can't do that again, right? And it puts that in their permanent file like you would in any other employer. And generally, what we've seen is that they don't revisit that conduct.
Right. And I mean, that was really one of my first questions there.
Right.
And another question here. I mean, the good thing is that, man, people are actually interested in your position, good or bad. Sometimes we ask people for questions and we don't get questions. We get other stuff.
Are you going to ask me the one about my resignation or no?
Well, okay. When are you resigning?
I don't know. I have a couple years left.
Have you seen the cartoon? I was looking for whatchamacallit.
I did see the cartoon.
I guess you saw the cartoon.
Yeah.
Okay, because that was a question here. It was like, man, ask Myerberg if
Yeah.
you saw my cartoon.
Right. I mean, I guess it's great that I have a cartoon. Did you think it was funny?
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, in OPA's estimation, is there anything preventing SPD from instituting discipline prior to completion of an OPA investigation? Or does Acting Chief Diaz need OPA's investigation or concurrence? But I guess we saw he just fired the guy.
Yeah, well, he fired them after OPA issued the findings. So this is a really good question, and it's one that we've thought about a lot. It's an unsettled area. So technically the chief could, right? So the chief could tomorrow fire an officer without waiting for OPA's findings. But OPA is the only entity that can recommend a violation of policy. So by firing an officer, I think the chief would take a risk that an arbitrator could later say, no, you shouldn't have fired the officer because there was no finding. But I think it's an open question. But I think under certain circumstances, for example, if it was clear that an officer was dealing drugs or committed a felony, I think the chief could flat out fire them without waiting for OPA's investigation to occur.
Right. First part of this question here, what changes would need to take place for OPA to be able to provide binding consequences for officers' misbehavior? But I think that's just the structure of how oversight's set up is
right.
that
I mean,
you can't give binding consequences.
Well, I mean, you can. I mean, you just would have to change the city charter, right? The city charter, and that would have to be by, constitutional amendment. But the city charter right now says that the chief of police is the final decider on hiring and firing a police officer. So if you wanted OPA or whatever you want, I mean, some people want a community board. I mean, pick your poison. But no matter what you did, you would have to change the city charter to create that entity and to allow that entity to make those decisions. And listen, there's benefits to doing that as well. One of the philosophies behind having the chief have that authority is that you want the chief to own the department. You want the chief to be responsible for the department. And if you bring in a chief and say, well, you have no responsibility to hire and fire anyone, what kind of chiefs are you going to get in the Seattle Police Department? That was always the theory, but maybe the community perspective has changed and now people want that. And if they want it, change the charter.
Right. Question, why does an accused officer get a SPOG representative to do an interview, but victims have no advocate? If the point is accountability, then should there not be victim advocates?
So I have no problem with a victim advocate, with the philosophy behind a victim advocate. I mean, SPOG gets a representative because they're the ones that are subject to discipline and they have the union right to a representative. If someone wanted to bring someone with them, people regularly bring attorneys or other folks to support them in the interviews. We have no objection to that. If the question is, should there be an OPA-funded victim advocate or some system-funded victim advocate, I don't see that as being a problem. I think you would have to go through the channels and get budget for it, but I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Right. I think that King County, it's a bit different, but King County just provided, I think, attorneys for the families when there's an inquest.
Yeah, and I think the distinction there is that's a legal proceeding, right? So, but I think it's similar concept. I'm not opposed to it. I mean, there's no, again, a lot of what we do for officers, and I think this same poster asked a question about interviews. Why do we not conduct remote interviews of SPOG officers given the pandemic? And ideally we would. The union said no. We've made that request. Like, we don't want to be in-person interviews to be subject to COVID with our investigators. But the union controls, because it's in the contract, they can say, no, we're not going to do it. And we have no power to compel them to do the opposite.
Right. It was, and there's another question here. Let's see, we got a few by the same person about mediation and when mediation is offered and what mediation is. Actually, there's a lot of people that don't know mediation exists, and what kind of cases is mediation offered.
So this was a case, and this complainant had spoken to the South Seattle Emerald, and there was an article about this a couple months ago. So our investigators generally, when they're doing an interview, they may read off a script, and part of that script is, would you be interested in mediation? So we've since changed that because this complainant was saying, well, I was subjected to excessive force, it never should have been offered, and technically she's correct. So we've changed it, so now we don't offer it unless in certain circumstances. But generally what mediation does, and it's hard to do it given COVID, right? But what mediation does, it's really good for professionalism and sometimes bias allegations when it may be premised on a lack of understanding between a community member and a police officer. It brings the two of them together and says, let's discuss this. Here's what happened. This is why I did what I did. This is why I felt like I felt. And generally it's very successful, but it's tricky because we have to get everyone to agree. The complainant has to agree, the officers have to agree, and we need to actually be able to do it in person, which we can't do right now. So.
And I got a question for you here. If we come back to, if you can remove from the stream audio, what's the biggest barriers here to your job, if any? If you're saying that there are any barriers to your job, or what are the biggest frustrations out here that you're encountering to you being able to, how you envision your office, you're the director, how you envision it working, and to where it is right now? What are the biggest obstacles?
That's a good question. I mean, I think part of the biggest obstacle is kind of what we're doing here right now. It's the amount of a lack of understanding out there about what we do and why we do it and the parameters that we operate in and how these systems work. And when I say that, I don't mean to say that it's your fault or anyone else's fault. It's the system's fault, right? Because we haven't done a good job at communicating those things out. I think the primary frustration that I have is that I think it's never enough, right? So the reality is that our office, we sustain, we find that policies were violated in probably 25 to 30% of cases, right? It depends on the year, but around that much. And that's higher than virtually any other civilian or any other internal affairs agency across the country. Every single finding is posted online, right? We come on these shows, we post things on the internet, we have a dashboard, we get almost all of our cases done, 99% of our cases are done in a 6-month timeline, but it's never enough. Why don't you fire this person? The discipline's too low. I disagree. You're doing this, you're doing that. And that's okay, right? Everyone has an opinion. I think what we've seen though with the explosion of Twitter is it's all the systems are being attacked and said it's not enough, you're not doing enough, you're broken. So how do we fix that, right? How do we move forward and how do we rectify that? I don't know the answer. But I think certainly that's my biggest frustration. That's my biggest worry is that, ultimately I think, some people push for this community board to oversee police officer discipline. But what happens when that community board doesn't do what you want, right? Are those people out? Do you have to bring in a new community board? Is it only certain people that should be on the community board? It should be from the whole city? I think you go down a really slippery slope that has no end, right? Because then you're just preordaining your results. It's a kangaroo court. And my job is to push back on that a little bit, right? And that's why my job is so focused on policy and law, right? It's not opinion, it's policy and law. So I think, that's my main frustration. My main frustration is just lack of understanding, and that's on us, right? But also just mistrust on both sides of the aisle, from conservatives to liberals, mistrust of systems. I can go through other systemic issues with you. I wish we could do more for criminal investigations. I wish we could compel more there. I wish, arbitration could be reformed. I wish, there was more work on making our recommendations mandatory. There's all these different things that I would do, but those are some of the big issues.
There's one more thing. I know we're over time. I appreciate you hanging with us. There's one thing here, and maybe you can give an explanation. We touched on a little bit. We touched about legislation in Olympia. But again, this was with Inspector General Lisa Judge, and this interview is actually going to air tomorrow night, the full interview with Inspector General Lisa Judge, talking about the Sentinel event review. And she talked about how, certain powers are curtailed and how, possibly through legislation down in Olympia, the landscape might change a bit.
I think the bigger question, though, is that authorities that were given in the ordinance to my office, to the OPA, were curtailed by the last collective bargaining agreement with SPOG. And so I think the bigger question really is, are there things that the state legislature can do or that can be achieved in bargaining that ensure that accountability entities have the right authority and the legitimacy to do their work without being shortcutted or hamstrung by collective bargaining agreements. So, it's gonna take an effort on a lot of fronts to make some changes so that powers that police accountability entities need to have to do our jobs is there and can't be bargained away.
Yeah, I mean, like, can accountability be negotiated?
It shouldn't be negotiated. If there is a system in place to hold people accountable, they shouldn't be able to opt out of it. That seems pretty intuitive to me.
Inspector General Lisa Judge there, accountability shouldn't be negotiated. I'll also talk some about the powers that have been limited, I think even more her office, the OIG's office, than the OPA's office by the collective bargaining agreement 2018 contract. And also she touched a little bit there about possible legislation down in Olympia.
Yeah, so I think, a couple questions there. I think as far as the collective bargaining agreement goes, generally, we've grown to kind of live with this collective bargaining agreement. It doesn't prevent us from finding that misconduct occurred. And when we get our cases done in the timelines, the bigger issue with the CBA can be the legal standards that it applies for arbitration and some of the risks around arbitration, because, we can do the best work that we can do. Everyone can do what they did. The chief can fire, and then it can get overturned by an arbitrator, right? So how do you protect against that? So there's legislation that's pending right now in Olympia that would do just that, is try to fix some of the flaws surrounding arbitration. There's other legislation that's been pushed by the ACLU and some representatives about collective bargaining, would be to say, anything accountability related, the city can implement. You don't have to bargain accountability. So I don't know that that's going to pass in Olympia, just because on both sides of the aisle, there's either support for law enforcement or support for labor. There's a legislation that would require officers to intervene. Representative Johnson, I don't know if you've ever met, he has been pushing a bill surrounding canines and tear gas and other tactics. So there's a lot going on right now. I think what we've realized here in Seattle is that there's no way to fix all this stuff just locally. You can't do it. There's just all these state components. And that doesn't mean that we're absolved from responsibility. We're not. But the state's got to work with us. The federal government's got to work with us. And I think that's what the opportunity that exists right now in Olympia.
Right. And before I let you go here, and I just want to throw this out here so we can hopefully have some clarity of how this system works, because I'm just looking at the comments and we're just a complex kind of process and simple at the same time. But basically, your job is to see if an officer's action violated policies.
Exactly.
And you don't make, your office, OPA, doesn't make the policies.
Nope.
Your job is to say, was this in policy or not? And there very well could be a bad policy that you can make a recommendation saying, hey, man, you know what? This officer didn't violate the policy, but this policy is bad. I think you guys should change it.
Or on the other hand, there could be a policy where the policy is bad and the officer violated the policy, but the officer violated it because the policy is bad or because the training was bad, right? So in those situations, like, I would recommend a policy change.
Right.
And we do it frequently. Right.
And I mean, I want to be clear with this, is that if people, the bigger issue here seems to be as well the policies themselves. If your office is as fair and whatever as you say that it is, and people are like, oh, there's so many things that are unsustained, and you're taking officers' actions and you're putting it up against the policy, then people need to be looking at the policing policies.
Right. And I just think, again, like, perspective, right? And yes, you're correct, right? But like,
just in the mechanics.
Yeah, just in the mechanics. But like, for example, look at the decision by Judge Jones recently, right? In the sanctions order and the temporary restraining order that he just issued. So he's applying the same law that we are, right? The findings that we've reached are very similar to the findings he's reached. Again, the force that's out of policy is indiscriminate force where there's no threat, right? So we're not an outlier, right? And again, like, if you compare it to precedent all through the courts, right? We're not an outlier. And if there is a problem, and I think you said it perfectly, the problem is with Graham v. Connor. It's with the reasonableness standard. It's with the deference it gives to officers. And maybe it's with us too. What do I know? I think everyone's always going to have a problem with us. But at the same time, change the law. right? Change that policy. Go to the legislature. And whatever the policy is, I will apply it. That is my job. And I will advocate in the legislature, and I've already done it for other things. I think I've sent you our materials. But again, like, that's my job. I can't freelance. I can't do that, because then due process falls apart.
Somebody asked a good question here, and it's probably a good way to also tell the public how they can reach your office. Somebody said, hey, is there a list of policy recommendations that you've made that you can make available to the public so the public can support you and those policy recommendations you made?
Yeah, everything's online, and I'll shoot a link over to you, Amari, that you can post. But not only is every policy recommendation online, we also give you a database of what SP's response was to the policy, why they declined it, why they implemented it, what they did. Again, this is our fault. It's not the community's fault, whatever the community is, but it's our fault, right? We need to make the information more available. We need to post the information more. But anything that people want from us, any of this information that they're looking for, is already on our website. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Director Myerberg, I've kept you over time. I appreciate you staying. I kept you almost 30 minutes over. And
appreciate it. Thanks, Amari.
I appreciate you answering questions. And I know that we'll see you again when these findings come out about the East Precinct.
Happy to do so.
I'm gonna have to figure out how to read some of these things on an iPad, so I stop killing all the trees. Stop killing the trees.